So I'm going to talk a bit, it's a bit different than the scope of the other talks. Okay. So the scope of my talk is a bit different than the other ones. It's basically applied more on the infrastructure side, which is more related to what I currently work with. So a bit about the introduction. My name is Casagrande. I'm Senior DevOps Engineer at PyConDE. There's my mail and contact details and so on. So one of our main concerns about security, in the past we had, without using kind of Kubernetes and all this new technology, we had kind of different scenario. There's a tool that helped us in the past, which is called Spacewalk, which is a tool based on, it's an open source tool based on a Red Hat developed project. And this is used for managing erratas on Linux servers, basically. Afterwards, we went to Rancher, which is a container orchestration solution, which we don't use anymore, but was important in the past. And during this time, we had kind of no or a bit cloudy perspective about the overall security status of the containers that we ran in production. So new scenario, basically we have now multiple Kubernetes clusters, as I imagine that many of you are using Kubernetes, I guess. So how to keep this safe and how to have, let's say, a good overview about kind of what you're running and how secure these things are regarding erratas and the known vulnerabilities. There are some tools that based on this, on the check that run on the CI of your project, but there are some cases where it does not work. For example, when you run kind of images that you get them pre-baked from, let's say, from the Docker registry, Docker Hub, for example. And as far as I could see, there's no kind of product or solution that could kind of fully fulfill our needs. So I'm going to this slide first. So basically we saw that we need to implement our own solution for that, and much possibly afterwards kind of open source this project. So we have created a solution that it's called Retina, which is basically composed by 3 components: ErrataDB, agent or agents, and server. The ErrataDB is basically, it's a component divided into parts. One of them is basically, it's a task which uses HTTP and MongoDB for kind of fetching erratas and classifying and parsing them and injecting into a MongoDB database, where I have this in a structured and standardized way. And it also exposes an API in order that you can submit a JSON with the list of the packages that you have, and it may kind of return you if they are vulnerable or not based on the information that it has on the database. Agent, it's basically something that it's also an API. It makes usage of IO Docker and IO Redis, which means that we are using async IO. And basically when you submit a request, it's able to find in a given Kubernetes node a given container and return you the list of packages or the labels of a given image that on which a container is running. We also have the server, which is the third component. It's also an API. It makes use of the Python Kubernetes model for kind of self-discovering the containers of a given namespace. So basically, with these 3 components, we are based, let's say, at this very moment to trigger a task, and I want to know in an entire cluster the status of vulnerabilities of all the containers running there, which for us is kind of quite interesting now because we have this overview. It's an image, it's a bit hard to see and identify what's there, but it's the infrastructure of the components. But basically what's important to see is that, for example, for each Kubernetes node, you may have an agent. For the cluster, you may have a server which is responsible for managing the security status of the things. You need to have just one ErrataDB, which is basically the place where you concentrate the database of the erratas. And basically by now, at this very moment, what we do is that in the simplest way, as this has been kind of just finished development, we are able to trigger tasks and to receive basically reports via email regarding the multiple clusters that we have. So what comes next? Currently, the ErrataDB, it injects erratas from multiple exposed errata databases on the internet. They are all open source, and you can consult them, which are basically Nginx, CentOS, Node.js, Python, Ruby, Ubuntu, Debian, and Alpine, which basically comprises kind of a great deal of software used when you create Docker images and you run these in a given cluster. So, of course, it's interesting for enriching this list. Next steps, much probably have, let's say, a comprehensive web interface and an external API in order that we can, for example, from the CI submit a request with a JSON, for example, and get the list if the packages that you are installing, both through operating system or platform related, just like Python or Ruby or whatever, and you have an overview if the things that you are deploying and building, if they are kind of safe or not, and if not, for example, you can reject that merge request of being merged and possibly deploying this to production.
You're severely out of time.
Okay.